Sarah had always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and tales of the paranormal never fazed her. So, when she found an affordable, old Victorian house on the outskirts of a small town, she didn't think twice about moving in. The house was a little run down, with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, but it had character, and she was excited to make it her own. The locals, however, had their reservations. "That house has a dark history," one old man at the grocery store warned her. "People go missing. Strange things happen there. It's been empty for years for a reason." Sarah politely nodded but brushed off the warnings. She wasn't about to let superstitions scare her away. Yet, from the moment she moved in, something felt off. The first night, she was awoken by soft creaking sounds, like someone slowly walking down the hallway. She dismissed it as the house settling and pulled the covers over her head, trying to get back to sleep. But the noises continued, growing louder, until she was certain that someone was standing just outside her bedroom door. Gathering her courage, she flung the door open, but the hallway was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, making her skin crawl. As the days passed, the occurrences grew more frequent. Objects would move on their own. She'd leave her keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them later in the living room. Lights flickered, and cold drafts would sweep through the house even when all the windows were closed. And always, there was the sense of something lurking just out of sight. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, Sarah decided to take a hot bath to relax. She filled the old clawfoot tub and sank into the water, closing her eyes. As she soaked, the door creaked open slowly. Sarah sat up with a start, staring at the door. No one was there, but the room felt icy. Shivering, she quickly finished her bath and hurried to bed, determined to shake off the unease. At 3 a.m., she woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost unintelligible, but it was definitely there. The whispers seemed to come from all around her, filling the room with a cold dread. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, trying to locate the source. Then, the closet door creaked open, and the whispering grew louder, more urgent. Fear gripped her as she stared at the dark opening of the closet. Something was in there. She could feel it. Slowly, she climbed out of bed, every instinct telling her to run, but something stronger compelled her to investigate. As she approached the closet, the whispers became distinct, and she realized they were calling her name. Sarah. Sarah. With a trembling hand, she reached for the closet door. The air was freezing now, her breath visible in the dim light. She hesitated for a moment before pulling the door open fully. Inside, the darkness was impenetrable, but deep within it, she could make out a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her. Paralyzed with fear, Sarah couldn't move as a figure slowly emerged from the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, with skin stretched tight over its skeletal frame. Its eyes were hollow, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices echoing in her mind, driving her to the edge of sanity. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You belong to us now." Suddenly, the figure lunged at her, cold hands grabbing her shoulders with a force that knocked her to the floor. She tried to scream, but no sound came out as the darkness enveloped her, pulling her into the closet. The last thing she saw was the door slamming shut on its own, plunging the room into complete darkness. Sarah awoke on the floor of her bedroom, drenched in sweat. Morning light streamed through the window, and the closet door was slightly ajar. Had it all been a nightmare? But as she stood up, she noticed something that made her blood run cold, a deep, red scratch mark across her shoulder, as if something had clawed her. Terrified, she decided to leave the house that day. But as she packed, the whispering started again, this time louder, more insistent. It followed her from room to room, growing more frantic as she tried to ignore it. "You can't leave," the voices chanted. "You're ours now." Determined to escape, Sarah grabbed her bags and rushed for the door. But the moment she stepped outside, the front door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. The house was silent again, the whispers gone, but the dread still hung heavy in the air. She drove to a hotel in town, too afraid to spend another night in the house. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the glowing eyes from the closet, heard the whispers calling her name. Exhausted and terrified, she decided to return to the house the next morning with a local priest to bless the property. When they arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The priest began his prayers, moving from room to room, sprinkling holy water. But as they entered the bedroom, the atmosphere changed. The air became thick and oppressive, the temperature dropping rapidly. The priest's voice faltered, and the whispers returned, now louder than ever. The closet door burst open, and the figure emerged again, more solid this time. Its eyes burned with hatred as it advanced on the priest, who recoiled in horror. "This house is ours," it screamed, a cacophony of voices echoing through the room. The priest tried to continue his blessing, but the entity was too strong. It knocked the crucifix from his hand, sending it clattering to the floor. Sarah watched in terror as the figure loomed over the priest, who fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the dark force. "Leave now," the figure shrieked. "Or suffer the same fate." In a panic, Sarah grabbed the priest and pulled him out of the room. They fled the house, the front door slamming shut behind them with a final, deafening bang. As they stumbled outside, the whispers faded, but the oppressive feeling of dread lingered. Shaken and terrified, Sarah knew she could never return to that house. She sold it at a loss and moved far away, trying to forget the horrors she had experienced. But no matter where she went, the nightmares followed, the glowing eyes, the twisted smile, the whispers in the dark. Years later, the house still stands, empty and abandoned, a silent sentinel over Ravenswood. Locals say that if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can still hear the faint whispering of those who were claimed by the darkness, calling out to anyone foolish enough to step inside. And so, the house waits, biding its time, until its next unsuspecting victim dares to enter its doors.